Hi, welcome to the Worship Guitar Series on electric guitar. I'm Paul Baloche, and this is my friend Glenn Pierce, and who happens to be like one of my favorite guitar players in the world, and has played on the Vineyard tapes and Maranatha tapes and Integrity Music. So I feel like he's more than qualified to talk about some electric guitar concepts in the context of worship. And that's what this tape is designed for, primarily for electric guitar players that perhaps you grew up, learning all these Clapton licks and you were in club bands, or who knows what your background is, but now you find yourself in a church worship situation and you're not sure what's okay or what's not okay, or perhaps you're a worship leader and you have an electric guitarist in your group and you're wondering what to do with this guy or this gal, and you're looking for some ways, some direction to give to them and how to better utilize this. Because I feel like electric guitar is here to stay. There's no doubt about it. It's such a key part of our culture, the music of our generation, that regardless of who has a problem with it, I really truly believe that it will be with us for a long, long time. And I'm glad about that. So this video is going to be pretty fast-paced. It's going to be relaxed. We're just going to try to move quickly so we can get a lot in. And so I hope you have your guitar handy and a pick. And we're going to cover things like effects, how to get the kind of tones that you hear on these records, and how to get those kinds of sounds, and how to use the guitar in a dynamic way. We're going to talk about how to create a palette of colors and how to make choices on different songs, how to decide whether or not to use chords or a clean sound or a dirty sound or a crunch sound, or we'll even define what those terms are if you're not familiar with those. We'll get into learning some songs. We'll also get into some soloing. So that's kind of an overview of what we're going to do. We're going to move quickly so that you can always rewind or fast forward to the part that you need to practice on the most, depending on where you're at level-wise. So let's start by tuning up.
The tuner is the most important piece of gear that any guitar player could own, because the nature of this instrument is that it will go out of tune, unlike the piano or a synthesizer or something. So you got to have a tuner, a chromatic tuner, so you don't have to necessarily switch around. The chromatic tuner helps you tune each string individually without having to change anything on the tuner. I think it's important to tune with a volume pedal so that there's no distraction in the middle of worship. I'll tune whenever I can during a set, during a song, any kind of break that I get. And I use a volume pedal that has a tuner out that goes to the tuner. When I pull back the volume pedal, it allows me to tune silently. For the purposes of the video, I'll tune the guitar right now. The first is the low E string. Low E harmonic at the 12th fret. A string. Harmonic at the 12th fret. D string. G string. B string, high E string.
Okay, here we go. Tape's rolling. 1, 2, 3. Okay, in this first section, I want to talk about equipment and effects, and the type of equipment. And there's basically 3 ingredients to a great guitar sound, and that is having a good guitar, a good amp, and some quality effects. So let's talk first about a good guitar. I find sometimes guys will have a cheap guitar, and then they'll go out and buy lots and lots of effects, hoping that it'll make a cheap guitar sound good. And in my experience, it's better to do the opposite. Start off, spend your money on the best possible guitar you can afford. And that hurts financially maybe. Maybe you don't have the money. But if you feel like this is something that you have a passion about, God's called you to play guitar, lead guitar, electric guitar, whatever, in your worship band at church, or you feel like this is a long-term thing for you, then, you know, save a little extra, make it hurt a little bit, get the best quality instrument you can get, and you won't be sorry. And then later on, acquire some effects. So in terms of guitars, there's two basic types. The first type is what Glenn's playing, and that would be a Strat type guitar, coming from the original Fender Stratocaster. But now there's a lot of different variations of that. But what makes it a Strat type guitar is that it has 3 single coil pickups. And with those 3 single coil pickups, there's a lot of tone variations that you can get. So that's a little bit more versatile. The other type of guitar is more the Les Paul type guitar, whether it's a Paul Reed Smith or there's several of these type of guitars. Basically, they're a heavier guitar, and they have 2 humbucker pickups. These are called humbucker pickups. Instead of being single coil, they're double coil, and it's a much fatter sound, much richer, perhaps, just fatter, nastier, would you say? Mm-hmm. Can we use that word in this video? Nasty. And, you know, kind of like the old Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, those kind of guys kind of leaned more towards this type of a tone. But once you've kind of decided on what kind of guitar you want, the next step is your amp. And again, there's basically 2 types of amps. There's tube amps or solid state. And I think, without a doubt, most guitar players prefer the tube because the tubes just have this warmth about it. It's not so brittle. Solid state can get real brittle sounding, and it's just not pleasing to the ear, whereas tubes tend to warm things up, smooth the tones out. It's much more pleasant to the ear. So once you've got your guitar and your amp, and again, don't worry about having to buy this big, huge, gigantic amp. You know, you can even get a small, decent little tube amp. There's a lot of companies that make decent tube amps for under $500 even. And once you've got that, then the next step would be to start acquiring some effects. And I'd really like Glenn to talk about that because I know that, you know, you could have one of those refrigerator racks with all those racks in it. But Glenn, we just did a session this past week, Praise Band 10. And to me, just the tones you were getting were just killer. Just the best tones, rich tones, you know, high soaring lead tones, clean, shimmery rhythm tones. It's all there. And yet he brought his whole effects rack in a little duffel bag, you know, that he got off the plane with. So I'd like to know, you know, what the secret is, you know, to get some of the tones that you have. You know, can you talk about some of the effects and why you have them?
Part of it is the guitar thing, like you mentioned earlier. Find a guitar that feels good in your hands. You know, go to the store and just hold a guitar. Every neck will have a slightly different shape, and everybody's hands are a little different. You know, hold a guitar, see how it feels, because that's your initial connection to the instrument. Once you've got that together, all this gear just helps you create a sound that's in your head. And nothing against rack systems. I still use a giant, you know, 24-space rack system, and I like that sound, but I find it mostly useful in the studio where you've got a perfect listening environment with stereo speakers. You can hear the stereo delays, you can hear the chorus, you can hear all these little nuances in the stereo field. But in the real world, most situations will have a mono PA system, you know, and so I find that the pedals with a single amp is a great tone. And when you listen to guys like Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and Stevie Ray Vaughan, most of their tones were made with pedals and mono amps, and I think that those are some of the greatest tones in history. So I really enjoy using these boxes into a tube amp, and I find it to be just as fun as using scads of other stuff. So I start with 3 general tones: a clean tone, a crunch tone, and a lead tone. And the clean tone is essentially the sound of the guitar straight into the amp. And the great thing about Strat is you've got 5 completely different sounds to help you create a tone out of that one sound. crunch tone is basically a clean sound with a little bit more dirt or distortion on it. This is a sound I use for just about everything because, again, with the guitar you can manipulate the sound into any tone. And if you use your volume pedal, you can clean up the sound a little bit. The lead tone is that sound with a little bit more distortion.
Cool. Now that we've heard the different possibilities, tonal possibilities, it's important to kind of lay them out on our palette, like an artist would have sort of a palette and have all their colors handy, or a cook would have all the spices in front of them as they get ready to cook. I think it's important, especially when you're just starting out, to have one or two good clean tones, one or two good crunch tones, and one or two good lead tones. And just kind of pull from those colors for a while and get used to those sounds. The thing about an electric guitar is a lot of times it can create the difference between a verse and a chorus. A lot of times the verse of a song will be real sort of mellow, kind of gentle, and you'd use a clean sound, maybe with some chorusing. And then in comes the chorus, and you want to add some more energy or dynamics, and that's where, you know, the crunch tone would come in. And then coming out of that chorus, if there's some kind of a solo, then there's your lead tone. So why don't we just kind of listen to a few, maybe a dry, clean tone, and then an affected clean tone, and then a dry crunch tone. Let's kind of listen to a few of those things.
One of the things I like about the Strat is it gives me 5 completely different tone selections to work from. And with any one of these sounds, I've got 5 options tonally to go with it. So on the clean sound, I can start with any one of those sounds. So if I start with a clean sound, maybe I'll add a little delay to make it smoother. And then for like the chorus section, like Paul's talking about, I'll go to a crunch sound. But what's great about this sound is that it can also be used for a lead sound. If I add delay to it, within the same pedal, and I'll go back to maybe the bridge pickup for back to the chorus. You know? And then if I want to solo with that, then I'll just kick on the extra distortion. It'll just give me a little boost.
Cool. Why don't we do I'll just do a little bit of Open the Eyes of My Heart, and we'll start off with a clean, and then a crunch, and then a lead tone. And you can hear the difference in how it creates dynamics and energy in the song. So we're stay on the E for a minute. Just start off, listen to the nice clean tone that he has. Nice clean tone. This is over the verse. Headed into the chorus, it's going to get bigger. See you high. He's got his crunch tone, shine. get bigger with lead tones. Quiet section. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. He's back to his clean now. I want to see. Holy eyes in my heart, Lord. Holy eyes in my heart. I want to see. I want to see. Lord, I want to see. Oh, Lord. The neat thing about what Glenn is doing is, we're about to get into that, is when he plays his parts, to me, he's not just taking over. I think it's important, as whether you're an electric guitar player or a piano player or a singer, it's important to realize that we're servants with our instruments. We're servants with our gifts. And it's so easy to just say that, but let that sink down in your heart and just constantly check your own heart and say, man, I want to serve with this. I want to serve what's happening at that particular moment in the service or that particular moment in the song. And there's no room for like some ego trip or like, wow, check out this cool Van Halen lick I just learned yesterday, you know? It's all right to learn all those cool licks, and they're in your toolbox, but it's knowing when to pull those things out. And that's the difference to me between a guy like Glenn and guys that are just, you know, their heart is still sort of to like, dig me, man. You know, they're still into that rock star thing. So it's all about being a servant, not a celebrity. And, you know, just ask the Lord to cultivate that in you and in your team. Talk about that, preferring one another and serving one another and being sensitive to what's going on. I also like the fact that Glenn doesn't just, you know, play 16 bars of a solo and do every lick he's ever learned, but he thinks about parts and things that will fit into the song and support the song. So that's good. Also, the concept of less is more, which we're going to get into, and I'm just cheating on my notes here. I think that's good. Let's just start talking about finding the right parts that support the song. So I think the most important thing a guitar player needs to do, and a singer, and a parent, is to learn to listen. You know, learning to listen deeply, you know, not just like hear like the intro of the song, go, oh, okay, cool, man, I got it. But like listen to the vibe, listen to the mood of the song, listen to the lyrics if they're available. Check out what the song is saying. You know, it drives me crazy when, you know, I'm all for like taking old hymns and making them more contemporary, but like when you get somebody doing like a, you know, holy, 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 you know, that's weird. Don't you hate that?
I fully hate that.
I hate when that happens. So, you know what I mean? We want to be sensitive. Read the lyrics and go, wow, this is a reverent song. So think reverently with your guitar and effects and come up with things that will create this something that supports the song. So again, I feel like Glenn does that well, whether it's a dark minor chord kind of thing or a real happy kind of up grooving kind of thing. It's knowing what to pull out of your toolbox. You know, you've got all these sounds and ideas in your toolbox, and the idea is to know what thing to pull out at the right time. And so I was just going to ask you, Glenn, sort of what goes through your mind, what process do you go through when you hear a song like this week? We did 10 new songs on an album. You know, what is the process you go through mentally to find the right sounds?
Well, it's definitely been trial and error for me because I didn't hear worship music until I was in my 20s. We went to a church that had robes and a pipe organ. And so I didn't think a band even worked in church until I heard worship music like what we were recording this week. So throughout the process, I had to kind of relearn my thinking, because worship isn't so much about yourself and your chops and how cool you are and how great you sound and all that stuff. It's about leading people into a more intimate relationship with God, and your purpose being there is to help them do that, and yourself to worship God with your instrument and your gift. So I guess what I started to do was I just kind of listened to the songs, because the songs kind of are a little different than what's going on the radio and stuff like that. And with a band or even a worship leader thing, I'll listen to the song before I'll even attempt to play something. I'll just go, man, what's this song about? What's it saying? What are the lyrics saying? Where's the melody going? Should guitar even be in this song? Sometimes I won't even play, you know. I'll just kind of, man, this is awesome.
Good point.
I love
You mean
to
there's
worship.
actually times where you don't play?
I'd say more than not.
Isn't that interesting? Just take note of that, guitar players out there. It's okay not to play sometimes.
And if you listen to the rhythm section, if you got a good bass player and a good drummer, a good rhythm section, that's the foundation. And so as a rhythm player, I'm part of the rhythm situation, keyboards, guitar, bass, and drums. I'll kind of listen to what the song is. If it's more of a guitar song, then maybe I'll probably add more guitar parts. If it's a keyboard song, you know, I'll kind of back off. You got to watch the keyboard player, because if he's playing a lot with his left hand, then he's playing really thick stuff in the low end. If that happens, then I'll go to my higher strings. If he's playing sparsely, then I know I can move to a lower register, play bigger chords, more open chords. And same with the acoustic guitar. If he's just kind of strumming lightly, then I know I can bring in a bigger sound. If he's definitely strumming hard, then I know to kind of find a spot and then really listen to the vocal, because the vocals are what people are focusing on when they're worshiping. If it breaks into a spontaneous moment where it's more music and that's where people are going, then you can kind of work with that. So there's nothing to replace listening. But I've also made a lot of mistakes. I've full-on soloed when I shouldn't be, and it's a trial and error thing.
Right. So you've made mistakes, and it's important to have some grace on your guitar player as he's trying to figure this out. But I think when we were talking about sounds earlier, as a worship leader, I think it's important for me to know what sounds are available. You know, so it's kind of neat if you can work with one another, for me to know, you know, because I know some of Glenn's tones as a worship leader, sometimes I can suggest, hey, you know, what about that you know, tone that you do where it's kind of chorused out and it has that swirly thing on it, you know? And he'll go, oh yeah, this. And I'll say, hey, could you maybe do that on the chorus? So I think it's good to know what your electric guitar player has available, and also for the electric guitar player to maybe initiate that. Go to your worship leader and let them know, hey, come and check out my sounds, and I want to make sure that what I'm doing is supporting what you feel like we should be doing as a band. And again, if an electric guitar player has that sort of spiritual and relational attitude, sort of the humility to be a servant, and he's not offended if I suggest something to Glenn. I mean, I can't play the stuff that Glenn can play, but I may be able to communicate to him what I heard him do before and say, hey, could you do that thing that you did on that other song? I feel like that would work. And maybe in his mind, you know, he thinks that's a dumb idea, but he doesn't let me know that. Just with humility, he goes, well, okay, but you know, there's another possibility here too. And then as a worship leader, I want to be open too. So there's this kind of preferring one another and coming together and coming up with the best sound.
One thing I thought was great was you brought in CDs, you know, and you said, man, I really like this sound. I think this would work on this song. And it helped me go, yeah, that's a great idea. I might not have thought of that.
Yeah, maybe you might try that as a worship leader. You may hear a song, and we've talked about this in some of our arranging classes, is if you're just starting out learning some of these contemporary songs, try to do it just like the record. Every person learning the part, the guitar guy learning that part, the bass player learning the bass part, the keyboard player. Get used to that, listening, and you'll learn about arranging and about not being too busy. And you'll learn, again, the concept, which I think applies here as well, is less is more, right? That sometimes playing as little as possible is the right thing to do. It all depends. So once you've kind of heard the tune and you've kind of, like Glenn said, if he's kind of deciding whether he should be playing up here or down there, let's talk about some of those options that a electric guitar player has. You know, there's volume swell possibilities, there's chordal things, there's little, what we call chicken picking, those kind of things. Let's talk about just the chord option. I know that if I'm playing this progression, for example, I'm in this position. Instead of Glenn playing exactly what I'm playing, a lot of times I find that he finds something on the upper string set. Notice he's on the upper string section. He's staying away from the bottom strings because that would make it too muddy, too thick of a sound. Okay, another thing he could do, he could play those chords. Right there he was arpeggiating those chords. But this time, why don't we try like a volume swell thing? Okay. So instead of actually coming up with a little picking pattern, he can kind of strike the chord and bring it in with a volume. So I'll play the same progression. And that works nice for maybe the intro, maybe the verse while there's singing going on. Now here comes the chorus, and it's going to step on his crunch tone now. Now it's a little bit heavier. Let's end on the C. Now let's say we go back to a verse. He goes back to clean now. Nice. Again, such a dynamic thing going on there, Another thing that I've seen guitar players do a lot is sort of this target note thing, like certain notes that on that volume swell thing, it could be either a chord, but sometimes it might be a note, one note that fits in all those chords. So in this progression, I'm playing a G, a D over F sharp, an E minor 7, and a C2. Well, there's a D right there. That's the D note. So instead of always playing a chord, I've seen, Glenn do this where he'll just kind of play around with that D note, or maybe a D and another note that's in those chords. They're called common tones. So check that out. And just want to try. I'm putting him on the spot here.
Well, in the idea, one thing I've found useful, especially in worship music, not really having heard the song and learning it on the spot, I'll listen and kind of hear the changes, and if you learn sort of stay in the same position, you can make its flow smoother than jumping around the neck. And in that sequence, I can go. And that's a very slight move. And if you hear it in the example, it makes a lot of musical sense.
Yeah.
We can play it.
Yeah, sure.
It's nice. It's definitely
it is, and it's nice that, as electric players, sometimes we think you have to play this whole big shape, so this big giant bar chord, but we're going to do this triad exercise, which was on the second volume 2 video for acoustic guitar, and we may repeat that exercise here just to kind of give you an idea that instead of playing this big beefy G chord here, or this chord here, or this chord here, just taking the upper part of those chords and accenting that, which is what Glenn was doing there. So I know you have a cool little triad exercise. You want to just show that?
Yeah, the triads on the top 3 strings, there's basically 3 triad shapes, and then they repeat once you get past the 12th fret or so. Taking a C shape, for example, you've got that shape. that, and then it repeats. And if you play the cycle of force, you would go to an F, to a B flat.
Cool, man. It's jazz, man.
Yeah.
I like that.
I need to practice that more.
That's cool.
But once you learn your shapes, you go through all the cycle of force, then you can kind of see all the shapes, and they sort of lay over each other. Like in that example, you've got your G shape to D shape to E minor shape to C shape, all in one shape underneath
So why don't you play that
position.
that position this time? Over that. Will be the second position. We'll see what happens there. 3, 4. Go through those triads again that you were playing. So there's your, what's the first shape?
It's
Is that a G?
G triad, D triad, E minor, you know, I mean, it's the top part of an E minor, which is again the G shape, and then the C shape, which is this. And if you look at it, it's a combination of the two.
It's nice. That's cool. That is a great exercise, that triad exercise. While you do that, and it's in your booklet, included in there, and it goes through the cycle of fourths, and if you set your metronome really slow, and while you do that, look at where the root of the chord is, and you'll accomplish a few things. You're working on your timing, you're learning the notes on the fretboard, and you're also learning where all your triads are, which you'll find that when we get into soloing later in this video, you'll find knowing where your triads are really important, and it'll help your solos be more melodic. So that's a great exercise. Go ahead, go for it. Follow that on your own at home. Talked about mostly clean sounds and some clean tones, but one of the things that adds such emotion to songs is the power chord, the distorted power chord thing that comes in on choruses or certain parts of the song, and it just adds all this emotion. So I'll play a tune like Rock of Ages and just see, just to kind of see the kind of power chord things you use on that. So 3, 4. One more time, I'll sing it a little bit. There's no rock, there's no God like God. No other name worthy of all our praise. The rock of salvation cannot be moved. He's proven himself to be faithful and true. There is no rock, there is no God like ours. Rock of Ages, Jesus is the rock. Rock of Ages, Jesus is the rock. Rock of Ages, Jesus is the rock. There is no rock, there is no God like God. Okay. Now, the first thing I notice is that while I'm down here as an acoustic guitar player, you know, he starts up here, just to give it a little bit different texture. But there are times where he comes down in the same register that I'm in, and that's okay. You know, you don't have to get, it's not like wrong, you know, you don't have to always stay there the whole time. You have all these options. I mean, there's an A chord here, there's an A chord here, there's an A chord here, So they're all over the neck, and so it's, a lot of times it's wherever he's closest to. And maybe the next time he gets to that section, I notice that he'll play, you know, a different shape or a different form of that particular chord. So that just gives it variety. Occasionally on this video, I want to take a closer look at certain exercises or concepts. So we're going to call that a closer look. And I want us to take a look at this power chord exercise and kind of slow it down a little bit and just really take a good look at what the shapes are. So there's our, starting on the G, if you're looking at your booklet, the exercise starts on the G and then goes, there's the next G, and then here's the next G. So I'm looking at the root. See, here's the root there, and here's the root. There's G, and then here's a root, and there's a G, or the root. See, it's the first note of the chord, the fifth note. If it's a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 and 8 are octaves, so you've got 1, 5. Okay, and that's a G5. And then there's our G, and there's our G. So the exercise would be G, G, G. There's our roots there, G. Okay, now we go to C. You can play that way, or, and you're only playing those 3 strings. 1, 2, 3. You're just playing these. You're not playing anything down here. And then G. So there's a C, and then another C. Okay, then we go to F. 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 See what's happening there? And then B flat. B flat. You might experiment, just play around with these a little bit like Glenn was doing. Just lift that finger off a little bit and mute it a little bit with your right hand. Okay, and then once we do B flat, then you would then do the E flat, which is kind of funny that it's right there, but there's an E flat. E flat, and then, and so on. So just go through the exercise like that, slowly with a metronome. I hope this helps. Let's look at just a few examples. I mean, we've talked about the theory behind finding the part that fits the song. And I'd like Glenn to just do another example or two of power chords. Just sort of, I want you to see kind of how he's playing those and how he's fitting it into the song. So here's a song called Praise Adonai. I'll just do one time through for an intro. That again. Who's like him, the lion and the lamb, seated on the throne. Let's repeat that again. Mountains bow down, every ocean rolls to the Lord of hosts. Here's the chorus. Praise Adonai, from the rising of the sun till the end of every day. Praise Adonai. All the nations of the earth, all the angels and the saints sing praise. 3, 4. Who is like do a big ending on the A minor here. Again, I think this kind of thing is really valuable, just watching a guy like Glenn play to these songs. I remember just hanging out, you know, watching bands as much as I could, going to the rehearsals and just hanging out and watching these good guitar players, and then going home that night and just practicing for days on maybe one or two ideas that I'd learned. Then I'd go back a week later and just kind of hang out and be a fly on the wall at their rehearsal. And you can learn a lot. So I just feel like playing some of these examples, like another song, we'll do a little bit of that, I See the Lord. And starts off a clean. It's a good example, again, of a clean thing. And then when he kicks into the chorus, it's going to have some power chords with some crunch on it. So. I see the Lord. He's seated on the throne of His throne. He's filling the heavens. I see the Lord. He is shining like the sun. His eyes full of fire. His voice like the water. Surrounding His throne are thousands singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. And as he comes down and gets quiet again, I see the Lord. He is seated on the throne of His throne. He's filling the heavens. I want to go back to that chorus for a minute. And you saw a thing he was playing up high. This time around, can you play something down a little lower? Like if you were later on in the song to give it like a lower kind of a context, or if on a recording, he might do one low, or if there was two guitar players in the band, electric players, maybe one would play something down lower to give it this bottom end, bassy, kind of beefy thing, and then he's got this high shimmery thing up top, kind of a U2 thing. So let's, I'll just play the chorus part of the song and check out some of these power chords. Surrounding His throne are thousands singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord. Going to the D. Maybe play a little solo, little lead thing. Okay. cool. I'm gonna rewind that and watch that. I'm gonna learn that solo.
Second. Should I recut that and just straighten all those out?
No, I like it.
I'm doing like a 2-bar thing.
Sorry.
I'm doing a 2-bar thing. I'm doing the 3 and in the first bar, and then just half notes in the first.
Okay, that'd be a great transition to come out of worship into the offering, don't you think? Not. That's cool. Soloing, man. We're going to get into some soloing and, you know, how to do it in such a way that just brings the emotion out of people. You know, just a good solo, like a good singer, just can make you weep, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
You've made me weep many times.
Well, I weep at my own playing more than you know.
You know, soloing and improvising, depends what country you're from. Some people say improvising. I prefer improvising.
That's good too.
And to me, it's like a language, you know, in that you have to first learn, like when you're learning a language, you learn a vocabulary, you learn words, one word at a time. And then you've got all these words, but what good are they unless you learn to put those words together in a way where you can actually have a conversation? In fact, some of our camera crew today is from Holland, and they're speaking Dutch as we're setting up. And interesting to hear that and how that does correlate to soloing, because soloing is you have to learn all your scales, you learn all these boring da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all these little notes where you're not really making music, you're not having a conversation, you're just learning the vocabulary of soloing. But when it gets fun is when you can actually start putting those notes together, putting those scales together, and then you're actually conversing, you're actually communicating emotion like Glenn just was there. And so it's cool. Do you have any thoughts, like just sort of philosophy of improvising?
Well, applying it to worship, I've found it's an interesting thing because it's not so much about blowing chops once again. You know, it's not about like jazz fusion. It's about worship, you know, so you have to kind of focus when it's time to do a guitar solo. It's time to focus on your own worship. I mean, you know, the singers are worshiping, they're singing, they're leading the part, and then it's almost like your time to sort of model worship for the people too. So you kind of have to think about what's going to express the emotion of the song in your solo. And I find the best thing to do is to go to the melody, because you can't go wrong. I mean, the people know the melody. It's not like a focus on me now, I'm just going to shred something. I mean, there are times for that, but in general, I think I just go straight to the melody and then start working off of that depending on how I'm feeling or, you know, where it's going, where the dynamics of the band are, you know, that type of thing.
I find it interesting that when we were just on the end of the last segment, we were playing I See the Lord, and you could have played something like that over that. But instead, just play a little bit of that again, how you were playing the melody. You were sort of 3, 4. To me, that just supports the song, you know, and again, he could have ripped into that other thing he was doing, which maybe there's times where that would be appropriate, but most of the time, I find that that's why I like your playing, because you either play the melody or he plays off of the melody, where he'll maybe just change 1 or 2 of the notes, but it keeps the theme, and it keeps the theme of the song and the melody kind of going in the song. So.
And then if you get bored with that, you just do it an octave higher. We can do it an octave higher if you want.
Okay, 3, 4. Okay, but for you to get to that place, didn't you spend many, many hours just practicing these boring scales?
I did, I must confess.
You know, and for me to learn Dutch, you know, to be able to converse with these camera guys in their own language, it would require me to learn all these individual words at one time, and then it would take me a while, and I'd practice conversing, and it's the same thing with soloing. You know, it's just you have to go through this period where you learn your scales, you learn your triads, and you learn your arpeggios. Scales, triads, and arpeggios. Those are the things. There's no getting around it. And I remember a guitar teacher at Dick Grove School of Music said to me once, thinking he was encouraging me, but he said, you know, the only difference between you and Larry Carlton, Paul, or you and Phil Kagi, I forget what he said, is about 500 hours of concentrated practice time. And he said, you can put in those 500 hours in 10 years, or you can put those 500 hours in over 5 years or over 2 years. But you can't get around putting the time in of just going over and over, getting these things in your hands and in your head. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, it's a progression. I think, you know, I still work on it to this day. I hear those players and I'm totally inspired, and I just think, man, it inspires me to continue to, you know, practice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's look at some of those, look at the scales and some of the things that you've used to get your hands to where you can do that.
One of the things that helped me was to change my scales rather than single position scales, like let's take G scale for example, to make them 3-note per string scales, like that way it gave me more room to play the scale. I can see the shape a little better because it's more uniform and I'm not stuck in one position all the time. And so I would take this scale and just practice, you know, up and down. And then I would practice sequences like a...
Can you slow that down?
I'm not sure if I can play it slow. I'll give it a shot. And the same going down. So up to speed would be...
And so that's a G major scale,
It's a
starting
G
on your
major
index
scale.
finger. If you move that up
It'd be
to
A
the
major.
5th fret, A major, same shape. By the way, that is what's so cool about guitar, don't you agree? The cool thing about guitar is that you can just move those shapes up and down the neck and it's the same fingering. Whereas piano, man, they got to relearn all the different black keys. So I think that's one of the really cool things about guitar.
But if you're not paying attention, it can also be the really uncool thing. Like if you think you're on 1 fret and you're not.
I hate when that happens.
Me too.
So I noticed that primarily, though, you play more pentatonic type scales. And pentatonic, penta meaning 5-note scales. It seems like a lot of the, you know, the rock players, blues players, that seems to be enough. And I notice you primarily play off of that. Is that true?
I think mainly because scales, if you play scales and solos, it tends to sound more like an exercise, kind of like that, you know? You know, that type of idea. Whereas pentatonics, the fact that there's less notes in it means it's going to be wider, there's more room for a melody to happen. But the pentatonic shape, taking, let's say, A minor pentatonic, there's the 5 notes. But again, that sounded kind of boring to me. If you use any kind of sequence like you can really experiment with these because they're very angular type shapes. Like one thing I really enjoyed was
that down for our viewing audience.
You know, it gives it just a cool sound
Right.
to it.
You can get so much mileage out of that shape. I mean,
Absolutely.
just show a few, like, you know, the Clapton licks, the classic rock licks, 3 or 4
Yeah,
of
if you
those.
add bending
they're all
to
in there.
If you add the blue note, which is...
Not all of us can play as fast as Glenn, so don't feel bad if I think we need to stop and take a closer look and slow things down just to make sure that you have this position under your fingers. So for the minor pentatonic scale, you start with your index finger right there on the root. So if it's an A minor pentatonic, then you start with your index finger. And we'll start on the low E and go. Okay? Start off slow. Someday you'll play as fast as Glenn if you practice a lot. Now some people like to, and you'll see Glenn do that because then you can bend later down the road. But for now, each finger is assigned a fret, basically. Now let's take a look at the right hand for a minute. And, you can pick straight down. Get used to doing that. And then alternate picking. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay, and really, you don't have to move your arm. You're just kind of moving this area. So. So get that under your fingers, then you move down and you start with that with your pinky, and it's. And there's your A major. Got that? Just sing little ideas. I mean, at first it might seem silly, but that's where it starts. Getting to sing your improvisation ideas. Okay, and the only difference, and let's go back to this minor one, A minor, and you'll know our last scale is the blues scale, and just by adding that flat fifth that Glenn talked about. So there you are, blues, man. That's all B.B. King plays right there. Also, the concept of vibrato, noticed, you'll see Glenn do this a lot. And that's vibrato. And instead of just going, it's not much going on there, not much interest, okay? So, there's slow vibrato or there's fast vibrato. Try just a little bit of movement there. Putting pressure down on the fretboard. See, I'm pushing down on the fretboard and kind of just giving it a little bit of a wiggle, and that's vibrato, and that gives the note much more feeling. So, also slides are another thing to give it feeling. Instead of just going, you can go like, where you start on this note, and you hit the note, and then slide it up without re-articulating it with your right hand. So you're going. And then you can go, add a little vibrato. Now there's another concept called a hammer-on. So go through these going, where instead of striking this note, these notes here, I'm just going to kind of hammer on. With my left hand, I'm going to strike this note and then hammer on. Okay? These are all little things that give the notes more feeling. You can use your pinky if you want. It's a little harder. There's also this kind of vibrato, especially when you're on this string and it'll tend to fall off. So you can go side to side. You hear that little bit of a shake in the note? So incorporate those things as you practice these pentatonic scales. Hammer-ons, slides, and vibrato. And the last thing will be bending, where you actually, and we take that for granted, but the first time you do it, it's hard. So you start there, and then you bend the note up to the next note. So that's the note that you want to get to. So you go. And then same thing here. Yeah. Okay. So try those things. Slides, hammer-ons, bends, vibrato. That's the thing that makes this little scale so expressive. Just kind of noodle in that area right there.
Okay.
We could go for an hour doing that, because I remember for hours going where one guy would play rhythm, and the other guy would just practice his leads and going, starting out like that. And sometimes even singing an idea. If you have an idea in your head while it's and then find a note here, Then find it in those spaces there, and that's how little by little you'll pick up some of those riffs. And the cool thing about this shape, it seems like yesterday, I remember learning that shape, is when you take it down 3 frets, you went from A minor pentatonic to now you're in, by starting on your ring, what is the name of that finger? Pinky finger, yeah. See how it's a little happier now. Hear that? So if we did just taking that same shape, but just moving it down a little bit, starting on your pinky instead of your index finger, I'll just play a progression in A major and just kind of noodle a little bit in that. I just love that. It's getting a lot of mileage out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that a lot of times when it's a majory kind of a thing, you use a lot of triads or arpeggios.
Yeah, I think if I heard a song that started out in a major type of idea, I would go straight to the A arpeggio that we talked about earlier. Keep playing on the A.
That's neat. And all that was just triads, just from that triad exercise, right? You were just playing that A and then that A and then off of your...
Yeah, and at the end I did go back to the A minor pentatonic. The amazing thing about the pentatonic is it still sounds good over the A major.
Yeah.
You know, there's sort of no rules.
You can go A minor or A major.
Yeah.
Even
Just learn as much as you can and then have fun.
Okay, time out again for a closer look. Let's slow things down. And if we want to be able to play like Glenn, it's going to take repetition of these simple exercises to where we get them under our fingers. So let's look at the exercise in our booklet, and I'll just go over part of it briefly. That same triad exercise that's in our acoustic video. So we'll start with A this time. A, 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 A. Then we go to the cycle of fourths, so D, D, D. Okay, and then G. See what we're doing there? Now here's a little twist. For soloing, instead of just playing the triad, you might get used to sliding up to those things. So instead of always thinking scales, let's say you wanted to do, we're starting in A again, so we'd go like A. Those are those three triads. Then we go to D. See what's happening there? And then we'll go to G. Or putting some of that vibrato. Then we'll C. Okay, and so on. Then F. Okay, and again, it's like triads, really. And then B flat. And just play with those. Just play with those, especially with a metronome. And just get used to those to where you can slide from down here to up here. And it's just second nature. So remember, repetition is the key. The more repetitious we are with these, and the more second nature they become, the more we'll be able to incorporate them in our soloing. What about arpeggios? You know, we hear that term used a lot, which is basically the outlining the chord. If it's a major scale or a major chord, it would be 1, 3, 5, sometimes the 7, right? And then back to the root.
Yeah.
And if it's a minor, obviously 1, flat 3, 5. So what would you do?
Well,
how often do you use arpeggios?
Pretty much, as far as soloing goes, all the time. You know, I'll add some notes in there, but again, I go back to the shapes. It's helpful to me to see shapes on the guitar. And I basically use 3 arpeggio shapes, which are, for G, it would be this. And basically, that's the shape of this arpeggio, and this arpeggio. That way I've covered the whole neck in 3 shapes, and I can solo over the whole neck from
That's
those
good.
3.
That's good. So learn those triads, those bar chord exercises, because again, you learn that, it's going to help your soloing also. Let me just, you were playing G arpeggios, let me just play a progression in G and just show how you would use those. And listen how more melodic arpeggios are in terms of just, instead of playing scales, which is more linear, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, this arpeggios and triads make your soloing much more melodic. They leap, the notes leap more. So we'll go. Starting to worship with that. You know, we talked about earlier the prophesying or improvising is kind of like prophesying, you know, sort of prophesying on your instrument. In the Old Testament, they talked about where the Levites, they would prophesy on their instruments. They would, you know, they were just so skilled and trained in their instrument, they didn't have to be preoccupied with, let's see if I remember what a G scale is. And Glenn's not thinking all this stuff. I mean, he's put in the time and the energy and the effort and the discipline to get all this stuff under his fingers. So when it comes time to just worship, you know, all it takes is just those 2 simple chords, and I sense that there's just like a worship thing happening. You know, he's letting himself go and he's feeling that. But you can't get to that place until you've put in the hours and hours and hours of getting the boring part. It's just the boring part of getting these scales under your fingers. But to me, that's a taste. That should be a little bit of a motivation. You know, when you hear that kind of playing, to say, man, I'd love to express myself that way. Even vocalists, some of you that are worship leaders watching this, being able to be free during a worship time, as we just begin to kind of close on this tape, just taking a simple chord like that and just being able to freely, oh Lord, Lord, I lift my heart to you, God. Oh, I lift my praise to you. And it just becomes worship as I lift my voice to you, oh Lord. I will give you praise. Oh, it's all about you, Lord. Yeah, it's all about you, Lord. I will give you praise, Lord, with all my heart, God. I will lift my voice, yeah. I will lift my voice to you, Lord. I will lift my voice to you. From my heart to yours. love song up to you. I lift a love song up to you. Oh Lord. Lord, I lift a love song up to you. Lord. Oh, I lift a love song up to you, Lord. Lift our hearts in praise to you with our guitars, Lord. Oh, Lord. Yeah, that's what it's all about, Lord. To give you praise, Lord. Give you praise. Oh, to give you praise. Amen. Amen. That's really what it's all about, you know. I mean, just to spend time as a worship leader, spend time by yourself in the secret place, letting God dig a deep well in your heart, you know, and build a life and a heart of worship. And just read the Psalms and get that heart of David. And if you're called to be an electric player, you know, be motivated knowing that David was called by King Saul to come and just play for him. Doesn't say that he sang to him. He just played. And I think, you know, Glenn has that same heart, that heart of David, that as he would play unto the Lord, that it said it brought healing to Saul's heart, who was suffering from depression and oppression. And I feel like music can do that to people, especially when it's combined with the Holy Spirit. There's nothing more powerful. Mm-hmm. So, I know that's Glenn's heart, and that's my heart. It's just that you would be trained and skilled in music for the Lord. That, man, dedicate yourself, discipline yourself, cut out stuff in your life that's just wasting time, and do the things that God has called you to do so that you can yield that to Him and that it can be used powerfully for His glory. And I don't know if there's anything, you know, you'd want to say to these guys, Glenn, that are struggling to do the kind of thing that you do in worship, but and what would you say to a guy that's...
What you said blessed me. I think the thing that you're seeing here is I'm with people who believe in, you know, the Lord's work in me. And you need to surround yourself with people who believe in what God's doing in your life. And had I not had that, I may never have gone into worship music. I would have said, you know, the music out there is just cooler or whatever. And by being around people who just loved God and wanted to be in His presence, just included me and made a safe place for me and allowed me to make mistakes, you know, like Paul did, and, you know, just kind of loved me through it. Make sure you surround yourself with those people that have the like mind of Christ. And we're all working our way towards a final goal of being in the presence of God.
Yeah. So go for it, man. I mean, there's nothing really more to add. You know, just go for it, and all for the glory of God. Why don't we just close out with I love a solo that Glenn did on a song called "Falling." Lord, make us worshipers, God, in spirit and in truth, Lord. We bless you, God, all for your glory.